mean, we can't name names here, but we've worked with companies that do upwards of 40 million in revenue a year, and 90% of the revenue comes from 10% of the customers.
You could have done that, in my opinion, so much better. So for me, that's a massive facepalm.
Yeah, so that's a good one. It's actually quite interesting because I did a master in marketing, right? So I think
How useful was that?
startups or scale ups,
Startups.
B2B or B2C,
B2B.
bad CEO and high budget or good CEO and low budget.
What percent of companies know their ICP?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to talk about this.
Number one, like, what percent, so just a feeling, what percent know their ICP? And then I'm going to follow up with a second one. But you first answer that one. What percent would you say really have their ICP figured out? Where you go in, you go like, shit, they really know who we're selling to. All right, we are live. Exciting times, right?
Very exciting.
Yes, first one.
Yes. So maybe we start by telling people what this is all about. So we recently launched our new company, the Growth Syndicate. And one of the things that we're really passionate about is building a business that, on the one hand, builds the growth community, expands the growth community in Europe, the US, and beyond, and also becomes a viable business in the process. So we want to do all kinds of things. From we support companies on an interim basis. We are building all kinds of community initiatives, of which this podcast is one, and we're going to be doing meetups, events, and building some pretty cool products in the future. So if anybody wants to find out about what we're all about, I'll spare you all the details. They can just go straight to our website, thegrowthsyndicate.com. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, they can always reach out. Maybe a quick introduction. So we have, on the one hand, we have Joliene. Maybe you want to introduce yourself a bit.
Yeah, I'm Joliene, also founder of the Growth Syndicate. I've been working in tech and SaaS for the past 12 years now. And yeah, super excited to start this podcast, but also to start this journey. I think it's there's a lot of things we want to do, and there's a lot of things I think we can change or add value. So very excited.
Nice. And then we also have, with a little bit more southern flair, we've got Clement.
Yes, hi. So yeah, I'm the third and co-founder of the Growth Syndicate. So yeah, I've been working also in B2B and tech and SaaS for the past 10 plus years in Amsterdam mostly. And yeah, so for me, it's actually first time on a podcast. So really excited about this. And let's get this going.
Yeah, we're still in that phase where this is awkward. Like, are we talking to each other? Are we talking to the camera? Are we talking to ourselves?
We'll figure it out, right?
We will figure it out. Yeah. And yeah, I'll spare you guys the intro. If you want to find out, check out our LinkedIn profiles. You'll get all the information. But we've been doing this for a while. And at least in my case, it feels a bit like going back to the roots. I moved to Amsterdam 7 years ago and joined a company called Growth Tribe at probably the peak of hype around growth hacking at the time, growth marketing, growth. It's gone through a lot of iterations since, and that kind of opens up our first topic for today. Now, maybe to give people a little bit of insight, in the future, we're going to be having guests. Today, Joliene is acting as our guest, even though she is also one of the hosts. Every couple of weeks, you'll be getting an episode, 30 to 45 minutes. It's going to be two of us hosting, which two will rotate on a case-by-case basis, and we will be bringing amazing guests. We've already got several great guests lined up. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to bring in people who have that hardcore experience, people who've done it before, people who have unique experiences, people that you can actually learn from. Because I think sometimes we often, or at least I often feel, you see these podcasts with guests who are really famous people. They've written books, they've climbed a mountain, they've achieved everything, and their insights are often really, really helpful. But sometimes you just want to hear stories from people who aren't 50 steps ahead of you, but maybe at your level, maybe one or two steps ahead of you, somebody who can just get you to that next level. And that's really the kind of guest that we want to focus on. And the idea is to keep it a little bit light and to kind of push back against some of the trends, which is most, when you talk about podcasting, in today's world, everybody's working remotely. That's a wonderful thing. We're big believers in remote work, but it also has its downsides. On the plus side, everybody can create a podcast. On the downside, everybody has created a podcast. And this has been one of our big considerations. Is there need for another podcast? And probably not, but we're going to do it anyway. And we're going to try and do it a bit different.
Only one way to find out, right?
Only one way to find out. Exactly. And well, we decided we're going to do this in person. None of us are podcasters, and none of us are video editors, and none of us are audio editors. And yeah, it's kind of interesting going from being more in the somewhat hands-off leadership positions back into kind of
I
hustling in
love
the
it.
trenches.
I missed it, getting my hands dirty. It's really nice.
Yeah. So if this sucks, you all know exactly who's to blame for this.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So yeah. So today's topic. Well, today's format is a bit different because this is our first edition, and this is basically us introducing ourselves, and let's be honest, testing the setup because this is if this goes live, it means the setup somewhat worked. If it doesn't go live, well, none of you are ever going to find out, so it doesn't matter. So we have a couple of topics we wanted to talk about, just things that are top of mind that keep popping up lately. Um, the first kind of section always after the intro is jumping into just a little bit of open discussion around some themes. And the first theme I want to talk about is something that I wrote about recently on our Substack, and that's kind of the I don't want to say the death, but the slow decline, or not that slow decline of the growth community, especially here in Europe. I don't know if you've had the same experience.
Yeah, I think there's been a big before and after COVID, right? Because I still remember in Amsterdam, even before COVID, there was always every week something happening that you could go to. But I think after COVID, really, it's been a big change, which makes sense. But I think right now, people want to go back to it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's weird because people do want that connection. We've been to a couple of live events now, and people feel like you feel that need and that excitement in the air of like, oh, we're all together. But on the other hand, you like people still see remote working as working from home and not as an opportunity to work from wherever you want to work, right? So I find it, yeah, it's a shame because I think for me the biggest inspiration always came from talking to other people at these events, and that gave me ideas to focus on my own.
But even in the last event we went to, right? That remember that everybody was saying, "I wish there would be more events of this style," and everybody was saying it. But now it's about actually getting those events that people can go.
Well, this is the thing. So I think COVID played a really big role, but I think even before that, we started to see a little bit of a decline. I mean, at the end of the day, I tried to paint this picture in the article I wrote, and it's, I moved to Amsterdam in 2016, and I joined Growth Tribe, and that was total luck that I was in the right place at the right time, and everything was booming. Like you got this feeling of, Amsterdam tech was just going crazy. You had Startup Bootcamp pushing really cool initiatives. You had Rockstar churning out top companies that people still talk about today. You had the Next Web putting on like record conferences, like they had astronauts and founders of companies like Intercom speaking, and Guy Kawasaki. I just remember awesome speakers, awesome vibes. I remember meetups like the Growth Hacker Talks, like the PR Lab meetup. By the way, massive shout out to PR Lab. They've provided us with the space to record here, and they are one of the kind of top PR agencies in Europe. And yeah, definitely, shout out there, check them out. Um, but yeah, you had all of these different activities, these different meetups. There was all this momentum, and I think the hype started to eat itself up a little bit. Every person was a growth hacker. I've seen people
I
with the
think it's
title.
even bigger. I think startups in general, like the hype around startups and scale ups and funding and being a founder, I think the whole like everybody was like, oh, hustle, work hard, it's amazing, everybody has the
Yeah.
same passion. And I think people start to realize that although it's great and you learn a lot, it also comes with its downsides. And I think the hype around startups and scale ups has also diminished a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that experience I had when I first came to Amsterdam was maybe just, my version, my kind of representation of what was happening on a global level. What I was trying to get at is, COVID changed a lot of that, but it also kind of started to change before. I remember that everyone jumped on the growth hacking hype train.
Mm.
Everyone jumped on that hype train, and then at some point, half of the people who were just kind of the trend followers, I always call them the trend groupies, they started going to they moved on to crypto, and then blockchain, and then AI. And I see people who I know used to go like growth hacking expert, and now it's AI expert, and in between at some point they were crypto expert. So I think the hype also started to kind of eat itself up a little bit before COVID, because even before COVID, a lot of these big conferences also talked less about growth, talked less about SaaS, talked less about growing a business, talked less about entrepreneurship. All they talked about was blockchain, and then all they talked about was AI. And even today, pretty much all they talk about is AI.
Yeah, I think as well that everything related to growth started pretty well, and then there was this bad hype around growth hacking that we tried to can probably everybody working growth tried to get a bit away from it, because it was always like, okay, you're a growth hacker, meaning that within a few weeks you can extra revenue because you're going to find those growth levers that actually can help, which actually I think is a bit harder, and it's not only marketing growth, right? It's across the company. It's more of a mindset, I think, in that sense. So I think that was also one of the reasons that we all shifted a bit away from this.
Yeah, I think it's also has a bit to do with sustainable growth. I think especially the growth hacking phase was like, let's get 100 active users and we are successful. But I think we all realize that that's not where the real growth comes from, and especially from a sustainability perspective, you think you grow and you think you have product market fit, but if you just focus on that one metric, it's not going to be enough. I do think, like with regard to meetups and coming together, I think that had like a bit of a ripple effect. If you combine that with COVID, where people were actually quite comfortable being in their home for 2 years and have that routine with, being able to go to the gym whenever you want to go and not having to go to the office, I think people got a bit lazy, if I might say so. So I think, yeah. But I do feel that there is definitely a need for people to socialize more. And I think what you've also said previously was that people are now going back to restaurants, and the whole cafe scene and club scene has really gone back to normal. But I do think that a lot of events, except for the big ones, right, like the massive tech events, I think they're very famous, but not the smaller gatherings,
Yeah.
meetups,
Yeah,
these kind of things.
yeah, I would even go as far as to say, like, I think some of the big events are also not what they used to be. I mean, no offense. I mean, big fan of the brand, the Next Web. Next Web conference used to be amazing, but it also used to be much more attendee driven. They used to sell tickets. And when they would sell tickets, in order to sell tickets, you need great content because you need to cater to the people attending. Ever since the acquisition by the Financial Times, my feeling, and maybe I'm off base here, but my feeling is that a lot more of the, let's say, the monetization of that conference depends on sponsorship. And as they moved more towards sponsorship, they moved more towards, I think the facilities are still amazing, so you still go there, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of people, and I love going to the conference. But I do feel that in terms of the topics, in terms of the speakers, there has been a big shift. You used to have astronauts doing the keynote speech, and now you have some kind of video stream from the soon to be former prime minister of the Netherlands. That's not quite the same. And I've seen this quite broadly. I've heard this about a lot of conferences, but there are exceptions. We've seen the sassiest conference that exploded here in Europe, Slush, SaaS Stock,
But I think
SaaStr.
SaaS is in, like, they are going against the grain
Yeah,
by
Yeah.
going back to that hustle, informal, like a bit of a party,
A
let's
bit
make
more
it
fun. Yeah.
fun. And I
yeah,
think a lot of the bigger conferences for like the Next Web have gotten more corporate because they also rely on more corporate sponsors.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree. I totally agree, and I think you made a really good point, Julie, with the difference between remote working and working from home. And I think on the one hand, remote working gives flexibility, and we all want that flexibility. We are technically a remote first company.
Yeah.
We fortunately all live in Amsterdam, and we can work together, but we are a remote first company. That said, I also think that the whole COVID situation did shine a light on people who are working too hard, who are not making time for their families, not making time for themselves. That's really important. And I think that's always an important part of your life, whether you work remotely or not. That's something you should safeguard. But the working from home is a different vibe. And I always say, the benefit of remote working isn't that you can work from bed, right? Sometimes you have a day where you're like, oh, fuck, I just want to lie in bed. But the real benefit is you can go anywhere and do anything. And, we could do a meetup in Amsterdam this week, but we can also do a meetup in Rio de Janeiro next week. I mean, any excuse to
Yes,
go to
please.
Brazil. Yeah. So I think that's really the key here. And this is where, we hope to bring some of these meetups back. And we're starting to see some of this community elements coming back. And maybe one thing that's worth mentioning, it's not like all of this disappeared and left a massive void. On the one hand, there are some people who I think also, as online, more influencer thought leader types, Elena Verna, Leah Tarin, Lenny Rachitsky, they've done amazing work. They've built great online followings. I still think that gap there for in-person community and in-person
It's more
connections is
knowledge
missing.
sharing, I think.
Yeah, it's more knowledge sharing. So there's that. And what I have noticed, and someone did mention this after I wrote that article, is there is a there are a lot of niche communities have kind of thrived, even with in-person events. And we look at one company that's doing really well, it's Pavilion, for example. So there are examples out there, and we hope to contribute our part.
Great. Yeah.
Cool. Right. So, what else do we want to talk about? I think one of the things we're going to talk about is your post, which went, which had really good reception. That
Hmm.
you posted yesterday,
Yes.
talking about demand gen and the dark funnel. You're going to be speaking at the Demand Conf organized by Scale, which is going to be an exciting one. Let's see if we can get this live before that one happens. Otherwise, she just spoke at that conference, and it
And it went really well.
went amazing. Everyone was super happy. Yeah. So
No pressure.
no pressure. So let's talk about that. Like, tell us about that post. Tell us about what resonated. Tell us about, you know.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. So for people, I hope people who are listening to this podcast know actually what it means. But for people who don't, the dark funnel is actually a part of the funnel or a part of the touch points or the interactions that you have with your prospects that you can't really measure. So, from people seeing a post but not responding to a post, to a comment by a colleague, to even a talk at an event, or seeing an ad but not reacting to the ad. So, there's all these different touch points that lead in the end for a person to search your brand or search your solution online, and then signing up for a demo or some form of information. But that's the only part we measure. And it's interesting to see that if you look from a budget perspective, that most of the budget goes to that first part, creating demand, right? It's like, of course, with some products, you have massive product market fit from the start, and it's easy and it's a very clear proposition, and people get it from the start, and there's a need. Most of the time, especially in SaaS, you need to build a story, you need to build a brand, you need to build demand. And that demand is built through brand awareness, through all these touch points that will not directly lead to leads or MQLs, but will um, generate in the end enough touch points for that prospect to convert.
When you say most of the budget goes to demand, do you mean it should go to demand?
It should.
Because I don't see that happening in
Yeah,
companies.
exactly. That's not the case.
Yeah, we talked about this great example yesterday. We talked about it from that guy who had decided to use a Spark Toro,
Yes.
which is the company by Rand Fishkin, who used to be will always have been the founder of Moz, one of the founders. And the guy just talks about how I found this product, and none of it's trackable.
No.
I don't know if you remember the touch points. Do you remember some of the touch points?
Yeah, it was his CEO mentioned it. He saw a post online. He has been following, of course, Rand for a long time, and saw his post. So he saw that trust base. I think trust is such a massive, important element to for prospects in order to for them to take action. And I think a lot of it is built on building that foundation of who you are and what do you stand for and what is your proposition, and that's something you need to repeat through every channel, and then that starts to hopefully live on its own and people will start referring you. And I was really, well, was I surprised? It was an interesting topic because it created a lot of discussion on the post as well. People saying like, "Is there really a funnel?" Which I also find an interesting topic because a lot of marketeers are now saying there is no funnel anymore.
Funnels are so
Yeah,
yesterday.
so last year. So
2008.
but I agree in the fact that like, is it really a funnel? Because these touch points, how you name them, can be in a random order. They don't have to be, they go from here to here to here, here, and here's a drop off. But I do think it's an accumulation of all these points together. So I do think there's some form of a, call it a funnel. Is it a flywheel? I don't really, it doesn't really matter. It's more like creating enough touch points of your brand so that people say, we need to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest challenge here for dark funnel is stakeholder buy-in. So I think we've all worked right in smaller startups, especially, and I think that's probably linked as well to the full growth marketing kind of thing, where the idea was to measure as much as you can. If you can, have a proper attribution and that the channel worked, then develop that one. And I think there was a hype around this, and then now branding is coming back, like it's way stronger than it used to be. I think in the last few years. But it's really hard, I think, if you're a startup with little budget to get, well, it depends on the startup, obviously, but to get the founder or the CEO saying, hey, we're going to do this. is going to take time, and we won't be able to see results right away. I think that's a pretty
And no
challenging one to get.
correlation.
There's no correlation. I think that's really hard to get actually, founders or CEO to buy this, especially when you're low budget. I think when you reach a scale up phase, when you already have, a few channels that actually bring in some leads, and then you're a bit more stable, then it's easier to say, hey, now we're going to allocate some of the budget towards those kind of campaigns, which
But
we
then
know
you
it will be
have the
hard.
brand already.
Exactly. Yeah, you have part of the brand. I
Yeah,
think you can always develop it.
of course.
So it's like there's always a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. I think if I look at my experiences, that's the thing I've seen the most, right? You run these campaigns, especially if you look at top of the funnel or brand awareness campaigns that are all focused around problems, right? Not so yet on the solutions that you offer. And then you talk with your CFO or somebody from leadership that says like, yeah, you spend so much budget, and if you look at the cost per MQL, I was like, but it's top of the funnel. It shouldn't be measured by MQLs. The success of these campaigns are not measured by an MQL. So
And there's and this topic can branch into 100 different conversations. I think on the funnel point, at the end of the day, there's a starting point and an end point. Someone is born, and then somewhere 30 to 40 years later, they buy your product. Well, something happened in between those two moments. I'm not saying that you should start advertising to children or babies. Wouldn't surprise me if companies start doing it, maybe more in the B2C space. So call it a funnel, call it a customer journey, call it whatever the fuck you want. It's, there are things that happen, and a bunch of stuff happens, really important stuff, before anyone ever clicks or signs up or does anything trackable. Um, people always want, how do you define demand gen, right? You hear people call, interchange demand gen and lead gen all the time. And, that's not the same thing. Building demand is one thing, and then trying to turn that demand into leads is another thing. And most lead gen efforts, because companies totally neglect demand gen, they're just trying to tap into existing demand in the market. And how often is the demand in the market big enough to serve you and all the competitors vying for attention? It's never the case.
plus, if there are so many competitors and you're all trying to go for that same high intent lead, then your brand is the only thing that's going to make you stand apart.
Totally.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. And I always say, if you want to define demand gen in the simplest, most tangible way, shut off all of your marketing efforts and see how many leads you still get. And if it's still a good amount of leads, then you're in a good position. Last year we sold our company Reveal, and there came a point when you're having those discussions, you're making the transition, and you have to start thinking, okay, do we maybe stop some of the campaigns we were running, some of the things that were in development? And there was a point where we said, okay, let's just pull down our costs a little bit, and while we work out the details of this deal. And what you notice is no drop in leads whatsoever when we started switching things off, because everything was demand driven at the end of the day. And people just don't appreciate that, a good brand, with AI, this is only going to get worse, because with AI, everyone can make kind of okay but generic ads. Everyone can make kind of okay but generic copy. And I think having a good brand, we're kind of going back to 60s, 70s advertising principles, where you need to stand out. You need to,
you have to be original. You have to be truly original.
Yeah. Which is hard.
Which I think in the end it always is. It has been like that. The thing is, like, you have a channel, you saturate your channel. There's a new channel, you saturate that channel. But in the end, if you look at the real brands that have existed over time and are still there, what's them? Not the or the software or the drink or whatever, right? It's the brand.
Yeah. I love one of those early articles from Andrew Chen where he says there's only like 4 or 5 channels, right? There's paid acquisition, there's SEO, there's, well, he calls it virality, I call it brand. There's sales, and then there's maybe partnerships. Those are the 5 channels, right? There might be different iterations of each channel. There's multiple paid acquisition channels you can tap into. There's multiple kind of keywords and strategies you can pursue with SEO. But ultimately, those are the things you can do. And people say, well, what about content? What about community? Well, that's all part of brand. And the only thing brand has that none of the other channels have is that it can be a channel in itself. Building a strong brand draws people to you, but it also becomes this force multiplier on everything else you do. Conversion rates on Google Ads are better when your brand is strong. Everything is better when your brand is strong.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
Hear, hear.
Yeah.
Cool. We're just preaching to the converted here. So
we all agree on that one. So
we need to get someone who's like, no, fuck all this. This is all kind of wishy-washy. Let's go after just the hardcore leads. Fuck all the rest. Who knows? We'll see.
we'll find someone.
So one other thing that we wanted to talk about is how you get started with a company. This is something we get all the time, right? People come up to us and they say, "Hey, can you help us? Where do we start?" Um, Clement, you've done this quite a bit now. You've done this with several companies in the last
Yeah.
few months. Maybe give us a little bit of insight. Where do you start? What is the starting point? So you say, yes, you say you have a company, you have some signals of product market fit, you have some sales going. So you're driving, this is kind of what we see often. Companies with strong product market fit don't need marketing to get their first sales. But at some point, sales can be a really effective way to grow, can even in many companies be the most effective way to grow. But there comes a point where you want to start building out like an inbound motion. You want to start building up that marketing firepower. So where do you start?
Yeah, so that's a good one. It's actually quite interesting because I did a master in marketing, right? So I think
How useful was that?
so that's linked to my point. So I think that was like 10 years ago. And I think the only thing I remember, and that's been the most valuable course in my life, is actually the marketing plan and how to get started when you join a company. And I think that was for me like something that I do in all the companies that I join. And that's for me, it's a mandatory thing to do. Otherwise, it's too easy to get lost and not tackle what matters. So I think the first thing would be when you join a company to actually audit a little bit what they're doing, right? To understand what's currently working, what's currently not working, and then at the same time, kind of do a market analysis, which includes so the market in general. So how big can the market be? The audience. So what are your type of customers, right? So kind of an ICP research and analysis to make sure, because some companies like target, like 10 or 15 ICPs at once at the beginning. And you want to say, all right, let's focus on the one, two ICP that makes more sense. And then when you start tapping into it and it works, then we can develop a bit more, right? And then it would be kind of a competitor analysis. I love doing that because for me, it's a good way. Of course, you cannot compare yourself if you're a startup to like a company that makes billions in your industry,
I was just going to say, yeah.
but it's a good way to have an understanding of what they do, where they focus on, and can help you out a little bit to figure out, okay, maybe we can try this, maybe we can try that, with obviously a different angle because you want to be different than those companies, otherwise you're not going to make it. And so I think for me, this is a starting point. And then when you have all this compelled, then you can have an easier understanding. Okay, this is what it is. This is what we can potentially do, and then I start from there, kind of running marketing or growth experiments, call it the way you want. And I think there is testing what can work, what cannot work. So test as fast as you can. So we're not going to get into details about how to prioritize all this right now. But I think the idea is to manage, especially when you join a startup, manage short term with long term results. Because obviously, building a brand is what's going to make a differentiation on the long term, but it's also what takes a lot of time to get started, right? You're not going to build a brand in 1 or 2 months. So it's how do you manage those short term wins with the long term
Yeah,
game?
I agree.
And so, yeah, in short term, you can have stuff like, for example, paid ads or things like this.
What percent of companies that you've gone into, and I have an idea for myself, and I'm sure what percent of companies what percent of companies know their
Oh
ICP?
yeah, I just wanted to talk about this.
Number one, like what percent? So just a feeling. What percent know their ICP? And then I'm going to follow up with a second one. But you first answer that one. What percent would you say really have their ICP figured out? Where you go in, you go like, shit, they really know who we're selling to.
I think that's a minority. I don't have a percentage in mind, but I think it's a minority.
Give
But
a ballpark feeling.
I have an idea. Let's say 20%,
20%.
20,
Okay.
30%.
What percent of companies that say to you, because I get this all the time, we're like, we totally know our ICP.
Oh yeah, all of them. And
Yeah,
that's
all of them.
and I think that's the important part is that when you join a company, maybe that's the French side in me, but when someone tells me this is our audience, this is our RCP, so we know it, I like to challenge that. So it's a bit like, okay, why?
But some companies hate it, right? So some companies go like, oh yeah, but you're going to come in, you're going to look at the ICP. We've already figured this out. It's like, trust me,
You haven't.
we can look. And if you are in the minority that has it figured out, that's great. Like that's awesome. That saves us a bunch of time. But I can't tell you how many times you go in and people go like, "Yeah, we have 9 ICPs. We have
Yeah.
200
Yeah,
ICPs."
or that they don't know which ICP brings in the most revenue or
Yeah, that's a big
has
one
the
as
highest
well. Yeah.
retention. So they're like, yeah, we have 7. It's like, okay,
It's a
which,
proper
and
segmentation,
they're
right?
like, we don't really know. And
Yeah.
then
We've worked with, I mean, we can't name names here, but we've worked with companies that do upwards of 40 million in revenue a year, and 90% of the revenue comes from 10% of the customers.
Yeah.
Like we've seen that several times.
several, I think it's especially if you work with enterprise clients or people who work more on the higher end, they rely so heavily on 1 or 2 customers that drive most of their revenue.
And I think I like that you talk about experiments, and you talked earlier about levers. I love the word growth lever just because everyone's always talking about channels, like, ooh, your marketing mix, your channel mix. Fuck all of that shit. there's 5 channels. Like, figure out the channels. But if you figure, like, these are the kind of decisions that get you from 1 million to 10 million, or 10 million to 50 million, or 50 million to 100 million. You don't micro optimize your way to that. Of course, if you're B2C and you're like a Nike type brand, then a 1% increase in conversions is billions or millions in revenue. That's not the case with most of the B2B scale ups that we see. That you need to do big things to make big leaps. And some of the companies I've seen crack the 10 to 40 million mark simply by saying, we have 4 ICPs. Each of these ICPs generates enough money that I don't want to ditch any of them. But this one ICP here generates 80% of the revenue. It's easier to close and they have the best retention. And then just cutting out the other 3, which is painful. It's really hard to go, let's cut out 25% of our revenue, and then building the whole positioning, the whole proposition, the messaging around that one ICP, and bam, 10 to 40 million.
Yeah, and I think especially online, you need to be very aware of that. I think, especially we as people that do growth and marketing, you need to look at your website. And I know the relevance of a website is debatable nowadays, of course, but it's still like you need to focus. And you need to think about who can you actually convert on a website from a size perspective, from an industry perspective. And some people have like 10 ICPs on their website and they all have this like messaging, or they have 10 ICPs and they have just one messaging that fits to only one of them. So it doesn't make any sense.
No. And like you say, totally different topic. What role does a website play into
For
this
another
customer
one.
journey? We'll save that for another one. Okay, we have now, this is kind of like our open discussion part. I'm not going to every time announce the sections one by one. This is more just because we're just starting out.
We're trying to figure it out.
Find our legs a little bit. But what we want to do now is, so there's going to be a couple of like preset formats that we want to do every week. The idea is that later we can look back. They're a little bit fun, a little bit different. We can look back and compare and see what different guests say. So the first one here is a set of rapid fire questions. Now, we're not going to do all of this, so we've chosen Joliene as the victim today. And Clement has prepared a number of rapid fire questions. They're mainly either or questions, and you need to answer without thinking and without worrying too much about the consequences of your choice.
We kept it easy, so it's not.
Do I need to explain them after?
No, yes, no.
Okay.
If you can.
If you can, obviously. Yeah? You ready?
Yes, let go.
All right. Startups or scale-ups?
Startups.
B2B or B2C?
B2B.
Bootstrapped or VC?
Bootstrapped.
Fintech or HR tech?
HR tech.
We have bad CEO and high budget or good CEO and low budget?
Sorry, again.
Bad CEO
Open.
and high budget or good CEO but low budget?
Good CEO. Any day.
Amsterdam or London?
Amsterdam.
Demand gen or lead gen?
Demand gen.
Yes. Great brand and crappy product, or crappy brand and great product?
Crappy brand and great product, because that I can fix.
We all agree on that one. Yeah. So
There
that's
we go.
That's
Cool.
what we get.
Very nice. By the way, for future ones, if anyone's listening and you have some to suggest, I think at one point we'll also start announcing the upcoming guests so people can source some questions and these kind of things. We're still in the early stages, and I kind of want to make a little bit, this is something we haven't discussed behind the scenes, I'm just going to do it here, is we want to take you on the journey of building this podcast.
Yeah.
So we've set this up pretty lean. We have a very lean setup. I don't know, it's very hard to show you a camera because the camera is doing the filming, but we have a lean setup. And we're trying to essentially get the most out of a pretty lean setup. And we're going to keep professionalizing. We're going to keep improving. We've not made it easy for ourselves because we said we want to do this in person. But in the future, when we have built up that core following, we'll keep everyone updated. Maybe we'll even share some numbers along the way. Once we get to that point, we're also going to be fielding questions. And
we'd love to also hear your feedback.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely.
Because we're definitely getting started and building this out.
Yes, share your feedback. Be as honest as you can. But this is our first time, so be nice.
Don't hurt our feelings too much.
Cool. So that brings us to the last segment, and this is something we're going to do every week, well, every couple of weeks, because that's the cadence of this. But we're gonna have everybody who's participating share a kudos of the week and a facepalm of the week. In other words, the kudos, something that we saw that we think is cool and that deserves a shout out, and a facepalm is something that we saw that we think deserves a different, not so nice kind of shout out. And we're going to be doing this every week with our guests as well. Who wants to start?
I can go if you want.
Go
So
for
I
it,
think
Clement.
my kudo would be for PR Lab to actually give us this space for the podcast, because how many places did we visit in the last few
Too
weeks?
many.
Right? So it's actually hard than it looks like to find a proper place for a podcast. So I think that would be my kudo. And the facepalm, well, it's not definitely, I think, one of the weeks. Something has been happening for a while, but it's probably the LinkedIn top voices badges, right?
Oh my God.
But the worst part is that we're all now all like, oh my God, but we've all been doing it at one point, right? Who
Yes,
didn't do it here? Who didn't get a badge at one point here?
We all had the
Yes,
badge.
we
exactly.
all
We all
had
had a
it.
badge. So we all actually did it for a while, and we're all hyped about it because we're going to get a badge. And then we realized that that badge
But
doesn't do
now
anything.
we did it, and now we stopped, and now we get to make fun of others who did it.
Exactly.
Or
Or
are
do it.
still doing it
still
and
do
putting it in their
But on the other
title,
hand,
which
on
is
the
the
other hand, I
best.
think it was a great thing from LinkedIn to do that, because they got a lot of people to engage on the platform
Yeah.
on a more regular
Short-lived
basis.
though.
Yeah,
Short-lived.
Very
Yeah,
Real,
short.
real
But
hack,
yeah,
basically.
but that worked, right? It was a
Yeah.
good hike.
It was a good
So,
hack. Yeah.
So I think those are mine. I'm gonna, Joliene, what would be your kudos and your facepalm of the week?
I think for me, Kudo is a little bit personal. Is Data Snipper. We were jury at the SaaS Awards, and both of their marketeers, or both of the marketing awards, were given to their product marketeer lead and their VP of marketing. I think they've been killing it. I think we actually had a discussion about how many companies, or like if you take it a bit smaller in the Netherlands, are currently really killing it from a marketing brand
Or just in the
perspective.
world.
Or in the world, but like let's keep it small
Yeah,
for now.
let's be small as well.
But they are really killing it.
Yeah.
Like from a brand perspective, from a clear proposition, from also a product marketing perspective,
And they're making some
and
money.
they're making a shit ton of money. So that's definitely my kudos. My face bomb. It's a bit older and it's not really B2B, so it's a bit out of our comfort zone. But it's Odido, the rebrand from T-Mobile
In the Netherlands.
in the Netherlands. So what I was surprised that there was just no mentioning of like, we are rebranding, this is coming and this is new and this is going to be awesome. And then just at one point it was like T-Mobile's out and here's Odido. And people didn't understand what it was. For the beginning, I was like, what is this brand? I've been seeing it everywhere. They have a massive marketing budget, but I don't know what they do. So for me, I think like especially as a brand as T-Mobile and Odido, you could have done that, in my opinion, so much better. So for me, that's a massive facepalm.
Odido or Odie don't. There you go. Been waiting for that one. Cool. Let me try to remember. So my kudos of the week goes to the spring conference, I believe in Austin, organized by the team at Winter around Piplaya. Cool looking conference. I had massive FOMO looking at people go in there. There's a couple of other ones as well. Sassiest we talked about. There's one in New York. I've forgotten the name now. Gold something. Maybe they need to work on their branding. I don't remember their name. Anyways, they looked amazing. Massive FOMO, and were really refreshing to see conferences not built around keynotes. I mean, as someone who likes to do a bit of public speaking, I love me a good keynote, but that's because I'm doing the talking. Watching, not so much. So really cool to see these different formats connecting people, and can't wait to get in there and do that ourselves. As facepalm of the week, well, maybe not, from a couple of weeks ago. Well, we're going to have a really interesting guest coming up very soon. Jeroen Brands, who's one of the founders of Simple Analytics, and he shared a LinkedIn post basically showing a bunch of comments under, there's one of the LinkedIn influencer, Justin Welsh's post, and it was 6 or 7 comments, all with the exact same copy. I don't know if this is the creator of the post using some tool to push engagement, or whether it's actually a bunch of people using tools to basically post crappy AI comments. I get on every post I do, I get at least one comment from somebody that's obviously written by AI. Yeah, that just sucks. And I'm a bit worried because, I think LinkedIn is a great platform for promoting yourself, but I'm also hearing things about LinkedIn wanting to push AI content and promote it more with their AI rewrite feature. And that's something none of us needs. We don't need AI written content. We don't need AI edited content. We need original, real, relatable content. Hopefully this doesn't become more of a trend. And hopefully LinkedIn will quickly realize that if they don't crack down on this, the it'll become a pretty crappy platform. So
really boring. I think I would love to actually do a whole podcast around the AI story around, because I get so many questions around people saying like, "Hey, what is AI going to do for marketing? And can you replace a completely marketing team with AI, or shouldn't you?"
Yeah.
then we need to find someone who knows what they're talking about, because that's definitely not me, at
No, and
least.
I think that's the problem.
Kieran Flanagan, if you're listening, join
Yes,
us.
we need.
Oh, and I
Kieran.
think that our next guest actually also we're going to be talking about AI and content. It's probably going to have some
Definitely.
good insights about it.
Yes. We're not going to name names too hard because we don't know what order we're going to be publishing these in, but there's going to be some cool guests coming up. All right, that brings us
To
to a
the end.
close.
Nice.
Nice.
Cool.
This is the moment where we're going to look back on the recording and we're going to see if it actually worked or not. Did we press record? Did we press play? Hopefully it's all
Yes,
good.
hopefully it's all good.
All right.
So, all right, cool.
See you guys soon.
Yeah,
See you in
bye.
the next one.
Cheerio.